She was 7 months pregnant, standing in the middle of the lobby her family helped build, when the order came down. Not a whisper, not a suggestion, a directive. Get her out. Security didn't hesitate. 2 guards grabbed Celestine Forde by the arms and pulled her across that cold floor while board members, donors, and cameras watched every single second of it. And the man she had built a life with, he stood 20 feet away and did nothing. But here's what nobody in that room understood, what nobody even bothered to check. The woman they just dragged out like she was nobody, she owned them. Not emotionally, not symbolically, legally. And by the time they figured that out, it was already too late. Before we go any further, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have protected you, this story is going to hit different. Subscribe right now, because this channel is where quiet strength gets its flowers. And drop your location in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every single one. Now let's get into it. Celestine Forde had grown up understanding something most people never learned. Silence was not weakness. Silence was a strategy. Her father, Reginald Forde, had been the kind of man who built things quietly. No press releases, no charity galas with his name on the centerpiece. He ran Forde Capital Group out of a modest office in southwest Atlanta, and he turned that modest office into one of the most powerful private equity vehicles in the Southeast. He didn't brag. He documented. He used to tell Celestine, "Baby girl, the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the least leverage." She wrote that down. She wrote everything down. By the time Celestine was 29, she had her father's eye for patterns and her mother's iron spine. She had a finance degree from Spelman and an MBA from Wharton. She had sat in enough boardrooms to know exactly when she was being managed versus when she was being respected. And she knew the difference the moment she met Darius Okafor. It was at a sustainability conference in D.C. He was on the main stage talking about green infrastructure in underserved communities, not just talking, but actually making sense. No fluff, no buzzwords without data. He quoted her father's early work on community-based investment without even knowing who she was. She introduced herself afterward. He blinked. "Reginald Forde is your father?" "Was," she said. "He passed 18 months ago." Darius didn't offer hollow condolences. He said, "His framework on trust-based capital is still the cleanest model I've ever read." She looked at him for a long moment. That, she thought, is a man worth watching. What she didn't fully see then, what she couldn't have anticipated, was the gravitational force that surrounded Darius Okafor. Not from him. From the woman who had shaped every decision he'd ever made. His mother, Beverlyn Okafor. Beverlyn had built the Okafor name into Atlanta royalty. Okafor Forde Holdings, the company formed when Forde Capital merged with Okafor Development Group, was the talk of every financial summit from Atlanta to New York. Community development, renewable energy, hospitality, healthcare, and real estate. The kind of portfolio that made city councils call first before approving anything in the surrounding zip codes. Beverlyn wore power like a second skin. She was precise, polished, and utterly convinced that the Okafor name was the engine of everything. What she had never bothered to verify, because in her estimation it wasn't worth verifying, was the fine print of the merger. And that fine print, that was Celestine's inheritance. When Reginald Forde finalized the merger 2 years before his death, he did something most people overlooked. He placed the controlling voting shares, 51%, inside a governance vehicle called the Forde Capital Trust. He didn't transfer them to the company. He didn't hand them to a board. He assigned trustee authority to one person, his daughter. Celestine became the trustee the morning after his funeral. She had cried exactly once, privately in her car, in the hospital parking deck, before going back inside to sign the paperwork. Then she went home and read every page of the trust document 3 times. Her father's handwriting was in the margins. They will assume. Let them. Records correct assumptions. When Celestine and Darius married 14 months after they met, Beverlyn attended the wedding in a cream suit that cost more than most people's rent. She smiled through every photograph. She toasted the union with elegant words about legacy and continuity. But that same week, she told her assistant, "Make sure Celestine's name isn't on the executive leadership briefings going forward. Darius represents the company externally. Let's keep the narrative clean." Her assistant wrote it down. So did Celestine when she found out 3 weeks later. Hold on, pause right there. Because what you're about to witness is one of the most calculated long games you've ever seen played out. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let's keep going. Celestine noticed everything. She just didn't react to everything, and that distinction was the most dangerous thing about her. Over the following months, the pattern became impossible to ignore. She was removed from the investor briefing call for the East Atlanta mixed-use development. Scheduling conflict, they told her. She hadn't had a scheduling conflict. Her name was quietly pulled from the co-chair credit on the Forde Community Initiative. "Cleaner branding," Beverlyn explained. 2 names above the logo confused the visual. She was seated at a side table during a donor dinner she had personally helped fund. Each time, Celestine did not argue, did not protest, did not cry in front of anyone. She wrote it down. Timestamps. Exact language. Who was present? Who said nothing? Her notebook was slim, leather-bound, edges soft from handling. It looked like a personal journal. It was a legal archive. What Beverlyn interpreted as passivity was actually preparation. What Darius interpreted as humility was actually documentation. And what neither of them understood was this: every slight, every redirect, every quiet erasure was building a case. Not out of bitterness, out of obligation. The first real alarm came from an unexpected direction. Aaliyah Summers was the company's general counsel. She had been with Forde Development before the merger and had stayed on through the restructuring. She was not the kind of woman who panicked. She had handled hostile takeovers, regulatory audits, and 3 separate whistleblower inquiries without losing a single night's sleep. But the memo on her desk at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday made her sit back in her chair for a long time. The Forde Community Foundation had dispersed $92 million to a vendor called Pinnacle Brand Collective over the past 11 months. The vendor description listed philanthropic strategy and community engagement services. Aaliyah searched the vendor. Pinnacle Brand Collective had been registered in Georgia 14 months ago. Its listed address was a suite in a building that also housed a private wealth advisory firm, one that had managed Beverlyn Okafor's personal investment portfolio for over a decade. Aaliyah drafted a careful email to Celestine. Subject line, compliance threshold, clarification needed. She didn't accuse. She asked questions. Celestine read the email at 6 a.m. The next morning, she read it twice. Then she opened the governance archive and pulled up authorization records. Expenditures above $2 million required either full board approval or trustee ratification. The Pinnacle payments had exceeded that threshold on 4 separate occasions. There was no trustee ratification on any of them. Celestine placed her hand flat against her desk. She opened her notebook. Pinnacle Brand Collective. Threshold exceeded X4. No trustee signature. Vendor linked to Beverlyn's personal network. Pattern, not accident. She didn't call Aaliyah back immediately. She called her father's estate attorney first. Because what the attorney told her next changed everything she thought she understood about how deep this went. Hang on, we're not done yet. The attorney, a sharp woman named Constance Red, had helped Reginald structure the trust years before his death. She confirmed what Celestine already suspected, but then she said something that made Celestine's breath catch. "Celestine, someone accessed the trust document archive 6 weeks ago through a third-party legal retrieval service. I only noticed because of the access log. It wasn't you." Celestine was silent for 3 full seconds. "Who?" The retrieval request was routed through a firm that represents several of Beverlyn's personal interests. Someone had been reading the trust document, which meant someone knew exactly what Celestine held. And they had still made those payments anyway. That evening, Celestine sat in the kitchen of the Buckhead home she shared with Darius. He came in late, jacket over one arm, phone in hand, already composing his expression into the version of tired that asked not to be challenged. "Big night coming up," he said, kissing her temple. "The foundation gala is going to be packed. Press coverage, major donors. Mom's been running herself into the ground over the details." Celestine looked at him steadily. "I know. I helped plan it." He smiled the way people smile when they haven't fully heard you. "You're coming, right? Mom wants the family front and center. Family front and center." She wrote that down later, too. 7 months pregnant. Invited as decoration. The gala was held at the Celestine Forde headquarters building in Midtown Atlanta. The lobby had been transformed with floral installations, a jazz quartet, and photography backdrops with the company logo lit in warm gold. Celestine arrived at 7:38 p.m. in a deep burgundy wrap dress. She moved carefully. Her center of gravity had shifted in the last few weeks. S and she had learned to take nothing for granted. She noticed Beverlyn across the lobby the moment she walked in, and Beverlyn noticed her. The smile that crossed Beverlyn's face was the kind that cost money to learn, wide enough to seem warm, controlled enough to reveal nothing. She crossed the room before Celestine could reach anyone else. "You came," Beverlyn said pleasantly. "Of course I came." Beverlyn's eyes moved, just briefly, to Celestine's stomach. "You should have told us you weren't feeling well. No one would have blamed you for staying home." "I feel fine. You look tired, sweetheart." Celestine met her eyes directly. "I look present." Something flickered behind Beverlyn's composure. Not anger, recalculation. She leaned slightly closer, voice dropping beneath the music. "Tonight is about the company's future. Darius represents that. We can't have competing optics." "Competing optics," Celestine repeated softly. "You understand." "I understand clearly," Celestine said. That was the last civil exchange between them. 20 minutes later, Celestine was standing near the donor reception area, speaking quietly with 2 board members, Terrence Adamy and Phyllis Gaines, when she felt a presence at her shoulder. It was Beverlyn. And beside her was the head of security, a man named Wendell Cole. "Celestine," Beverlyn said pleasantly, as though commenting on the weather. "You seem uncomfortable. Wendell is going to help you to somewhere quieter." Celestine turned slowly. "I'm not uncomfortable." "You're on your feet too long. It's not good for the baby." "I appreciate the concern. I'm staying." Beverlyn's voice dropped just enough that only the 4 of them could hear. "This isn't a request." Wendell placed a hand on Celestine's arm. She looked at the hand, then at Wendell, then at Beverlyn. "Remove your hand," she said quietly. Wendell hesitated, and that hesitation cost Beverlyn the patience she didn't have. "Escort her out. Now." What happened next took 11 seconds. Terrence Adamy stepped forward. "Beverlyn, hold on." He was bypassed. Wendell and another guard moved Celestine toward the lobby entrance. Her heel caught on the decorative floor runner. She stumbled slightly, one hand flying instinctively to her stomach, the other gripping the guard's arm just to stay upright. "Please," she said, voice still controlled, still low. "Don't push a pregnant woman." Nobody stopped. The jazz quartet missed a note. 2 photographers turned their lenses instinctively. Darius, mid-conversation across the room, heard the energy shift and turned around just as the lobby doors swung shut behind his wife. Beverlyn was already at the microphone. "Apologies for the brief interruption, everyone. Family first always. Now, let's talk about the future." Polite applause. Nervous applause. Something isn't right applause. If you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, drop a fire in the comments. And if someone shared this video with you and you're not subscribed yet, this is your sign. Hit that button. Tell me where you're watching from. Stay with me, because the twist is coming and it's going to rearrange everything you just saw. Outside, the Atlanta night air hit Celestine like a reset. She stood on the steps for exactly 45 seconds. Not because she was shaken, because she was counting. Then she called Constance Red. "It happened," she said. "Physical removal. Documented witnesses. I need a chain of custody on everything we've discussed. Are you safe? I need you to answer my question. Yes. Everything's preserved." Celestine exhaled once. "Good." She took a car to Grady Memorial, not in panic, in procedure. The attending physician confirmed stress-induced uterine tightening. The baby was stable. Celestine was monitored for 3 hours. The physician's notes documented patient reports external physical force during the incident. No fall, no direct impact. Tightening is consistent with an acute stress response. Celestine read those notes carefully. Then she asked the nurse for a printed copy. Darius called at 10:14 p.m. "Where are you?" "The hospital." Silence. "What happened?" "Your mother removed me from the building." More silence, this kind heavier. "She said you were overwhelmed." "I was escorted out of the building I co-own while pregnant." "Does that sound like overwhelmed to you?" "Celestine Darius." Her voice was steady, quiet. The guards put their hands on me. "I have a doctor's report. I have witnesses. I have 2 photographers who turned their cameras toward us. What I don't have is my husband walking toward me when I needed him. The silence that followed lasted longer than any argument could have. I'll come." "Dunt," she ended the call. Back at headquarters the following morning, Aaliyah Summers arrived to find an email from Celestine in her inbox, sent at 2:47 a.m. "Aaliyah, initiate litigation hold immediately. All communications, financial records, and vendor documentation for the past 14 months. No deletions, no overwrites. Discreet." CF Aaliyah read it twice. Then she called IT security before she even made coffee. "Litigation hold. Full scope. Nothing leaves this system." By 9 a.m., a forensic accountant named Devin Isaacs had been engaged. Devin didn't Dodramac. He did data. He had untangled financial schemes for 3 federal investigations and 2 Fortune 500 internal audits. He pulled up the Pinnacle Brand collective records and started at the beginning. What he found by noon made Aaliyah sit down. Because Pinnacle Brand Collective wasn't just connected to Beverland's personal network. The money hadn't stopped there. It had kept moving. Devin traced the routing. Okafor Ford Community Foundation, Right Arrow Pinnacle Brand Collective, Right Arrow, a Delaware LLC called Sovereign Tier Consulting, Right Arrow, a private equity stake in a green energy startup. Beverland Okafor had publicly endorsed that startup at the company's last investor summit. Strong conviction plays, she had said from the stage. She had not disclosed that she held a beneficial interest through a multi-step routing chain. Devin leaned back in his chair. "This isn't aggressive accounting," he said quietly to Aaliyah. "This is a self-dealing loop." Aaliyah's jaw tightened. "How much?" $9. 2 million routed. Approximately 2. 8 million landed in an entity she personally benefits from. Without disclosure. Without disclosure. Aaliyah drafted a supplemental memo to Celestine. 3 lines. No emotion. Devin confirms the indirect self-dealing loop. Beneficial overlap established. Disclosure absent. Your call. Celestine read it from her home office while the baby moved steadily beneath her hands. She opened her notebook. Self-dealing confirmed. Fiduciary breach documented. Trustee override clause applicable. She underlined the trustee override. Then she drafted a notice of a special board session. The notice landed in 9 inboxes at 9:00 a.m. on a Thursday. Board members, general counsel, outside attorneys. Subject special session, governance review. Trustee authority invoked per Ford Capital Trust, Section 7.3. Beverland read it in her car. She called Darius before she reached the parking garage. "Did you know about this?" "I just received it." "She's invoking trustee authority." "Mom, what is trustee authority?" Silence. "It's procedural overreach. I'll handle it." But she said it slightly too fast. And Darius, for the first time, noticed. The board session convened at 10 a.m. In conference room A, Celestine entered last. No fanfare. Flat shoes, charcoal blazer, 7 months of pregnancy carried with the posture of someone who had been preparing for this room for 3 years. She placed her folder on the table. Beverland sat at the opposite end, composed as architecture. Aaliyah opened the session. "This meeting is convened under trustee authority pursuant to Section 7, 3 of Ford Capital Trust." Beverland interjected immediately. Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge that what we're really dealing with is a family tension that's been escalated into a governance matter. Board member Terence Adami, the same man who had tried to intervene at the gala, spoke quietly. "Beverlyn, I was standing there. What I saw wasn't family tension." Beverlyn's composure held, but something tightened beneath it. She was being assisted. Aaliyah pressed a key on her laptop. Audio filled the room. Beverlyn's voice, unmistakable, measured, cold. "Escort her out. Now." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The recording continued, the shuffle of footsteps, the sound of the lobby runner catching Celestine's voice. "Please, don't push a pregnant woman." Darius, seated halfway down the table, closed his eyes. Beverlyn straightened. "Context matters." "I was there is no context," Terence said quietly. "That makes that acceptable." Celestine slid the physician's report across the table. "Stress-induced uterine episode. External physical force acknowledged. Physician notes entered as exhibit." Darius's face drained of color. Beverlyn turned to him reflexively, the way she always had, reaching for him as her anchor. "Darius, this is theater." He looked at his mother, then at the report, then at his wife. "Did you plan the removal before the gala?" he asked. Beverlyn blinked. "I was protecting the company's image." "Did you plan it before the gala?" he repeated. Aaliyah slid a second document forward, a recovered email sent 2 days before the event. "To Wendell Cole. From B. Okafor. Subject tomorrow. Ensure Celestine's presence remains limited. If she causes disruption, remove her quietly. We cannot afford the optics." The room went completely still. Stay right there. Because what Darius does next is the moment this entire story turns. Drop a comment right now. What would you do if you found out someone you loved had planned something like this? And if you're not subscribed, now is the time. Don't miss what's coming. Darius set the email down slowly. "You planned it. I made a judgment call. You planned to physically remove my pregnant wife from a public event. I was protecting." "Stop saying that." His voice didn't rise. It dropped, and somehow that was worse. Beverlyn looked at him with the expression she had used his entire life, patient, certain, in command. "You're choosing her over family." Darius looked at his mother for a long moment. The kind of look that happens when someone finally sees clearly after years of choosing comfort over truth. "I'm choosing accountability," he said. Beverlyn turned to Celestine. "You staged this." Celestine's voice was even. "I documented it. There's a difference." The vote was called. Terence Adami. Aye, Phyllis Gaines. Aye, 3 more board members. Aye. Darius paused for 3 seconds that felt like an entire season. Then, aye. Beverlyn Okafor's executive authority was suspended immediately pending a full independent investigation. No shouting. No gavel. Just record. Beverlyn left conference room without another word. But she didn't go quietly into the city. Within 48 hours, her private network was activated. Whispers began circulating through Atlanta's philanthropic circles about a young woman overwhelmed by pregnancy, conflating family dynamics with governance matters. Emotional, unstable. She didn't accuse Celestine directly. She implied, and for a moment it almost worked, until Devin Isaacs delivered his full forensic report. $9.2 million. 4 threshold breaches. 0 trustee ratification. 1 self-dealing loop. 1 pre-written directive was to remove the trustee from a public event before she could observe anything. When Aaliyah forwarded the complete findings to the board, Phyllis Gaines called Terence Adami from her car. "This isn't mismanagement," she said. "No," Terence agreed. "It isn't. The board voted to make the removal permanent pending external regulatory review, and Celestine filed a voluntary disclosure with the Securities and Exchange Commission before anyone could file a complaint against them. The night after the disclosure was filed, Darius came home to find Celestine at the dining table. In front of her was a folder. Not the trust documents, not the audit reports. A separation agreement. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. "You're leaving." "I'm choosing clarity," she said. He sat down. He didn't fight it. He didn't perform. "I stood there," he said quietly, Head to gala. I stood there and I didn't move. Yes, I told myself it was the right call. That Mom knew what she was doing. That you'd understand later. Celestine met his eyes. You told yourself a story that was easier than the truth. He nodded slowly. I know. Darius. Her voice softened, not in forgiveness, but in honesty. You're not a bad man. You're a man who was never asked to see clearly. And I cannot rebuild a marriage on the foundation of someone else's awakening. He swallowed hard. Is there any version where... There is a version, she said gently, where you become who your children deserve. But that work is yours, not mine to wait for. He looked at her hands resting over her stomach. A man watching the consequences of hesitation settle into permanent shape. I won't contest it, he said. I know, she replied. That's the first unscripted thing you've done in years. The SEC issued preliminary findings 31 days later. Failure to disclose beneficial financial interest. Breach of fiduciary transparency obligations. Mitigating factor, voluntary disclosure and immediate corrective action. Civil penalty assessed. No criminal referral at this time. Beverlyn Okafor resigned from all advisory roles in Okafor Forde Holdings within 2 weeks of the findings. No press conference. No statement. Just absence. Her communications director released 4 sentences about her pursuing personal philanthropic endeavors. Nobody called it a victory. There was nothing to celebrate. What there was a correction. 3 weeks before her due date, Celestine stood at a podium in the same marble lobby where everything had broken open. Employees gathered, not in crisis, but in transition. She was brief. Institutions survive because structure survives, not because individuals remain unchallenged. What happened here was a failure of oversight. What happens next is our choice. She outlined the new compliance framework, independent committee, mandatory conflict of interest declarations. Security protocols require written authorization and documentation. When she stepped back from the podium, Wendell Cole, who had put his hands on her 3 months earlier, stepped aside and lowered his head slightly. She didn't acknowledge it publicly. She noted it privately. Behavioral change. The beginning of accountability. The baby came on a quiet Tuesday morning just before sunrise. Celestine named her Rain, not for drama, not for symbolism, because the name meant to rule with order, and order, Celestine had decided, was the most powerful inheritance she could give. Darius was in the room, not as a husband, as a father. The distinction Celestine had made clear mattered enormously. He held Rain for the first time, and his face changed in the way faces change when something irreversible becomes real. She looks like your father, he said softly. Celestine looked at her daughter's fingers curled tight and small. She looks like herself, she said. 6 months later, Celestine moved into a quiet house near Cascade Road. A porch, a yard, enough space for a child to run, not a penthouse, not a showcase. A home. She took her leather notebook from the drawer. She opened it to the final page. She wrote, Gala directive, recorded. Financial breach, documented. Corrective authority executed. Marriage concluded with dignity. Daughter born in Toa Truckshire. She paused before the last line. Then she wrote, left with everything that was always mine. She closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf, not hidden, not discarded, archived. Outside, her daughter was asleep in the next room. The city moved at its own pace. The company she legally governed had restructured itself around transparency. And Beverlyn Okafor sat in her townhouse across town, looking at photographs of a version of power that had permanently expired. She had built a kingdom on narrative. She had never accounted for documentation. There are moments in life when the people closest to you mistake your silence for surrender, when they take your stillness as permission, when they look at your patience and see weakness instead of preparation. Celestine Forde never raised her voice. She never retaliated with spectacle. She never humiliated anyone publicly when she had the power to bury them. She observed, she recorded, she moved with structure, and when the time came, she didn't just reclaim her seat at the table, she revealed that she had always owned the table. But here's the part that lingers long after the story ends. She walked away anyway. Not because she lost. Because she understood something that power alone never teaches you. Freedom is worth more than dominance. And dignity, real dignity, requires the courage to choose peace over performance. If you've ever been the most qualified person in the room and still been made to feel like a guest in your own house, if you've ever chosen patience when everything in you wanted to react, if you've ever documented instead of detonated, this story was for you. Drop your location in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single comment. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are we doing? Hit that button. Because this channel is built for people who understand that the quietest person in the room is often carrying the most power. Some stories don't need volume. They just need the truth.